Welcome to the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning at Morgan State University. It's great to see lots of familiar faces and a few new faces. I think everybody knows me. My name is Catherine Martin Dunlop, and I'm the director of our center, which is still relatively new. I think, a year and a half that it's been up and running. We've had lots of events, but this is the first time we've had a virtual panel discussion. And today we are here in person, Dr. Gellum and Dr. Kelly. We have 6 journal editors joining us virtually from across the country representing various journals. And we are video recording this so that folks can send it to other people, students, later tonight or tomorrow.
I'm Maruhan Limbo.
In the Los Angeles area. I teach in the College of Education in the Department of Educational Studies and Policy, Education Policy Studies. I teach undergrads and grad students, and I'm happy to be part of this panel today.
Thank you. And representing Arkansas, Dr. Sella.
My name is Amani Saleh. I'm professor of curriculum and instruction and the editor of Journal of Interdisciplinary Studies Education at Arkansas State University.
My name is Sam Sarma. I am an associate professor in the Department of Writing and Rhetoric at Stony Brook University, part of State University of New York.
Okay, welcome.
How are you? I'm Rommel Miranda, and this is Ron Herman. We're professors of science education at Towson University in the Department of Physics, Astronomy, and Geosciences. And we're in Maryland.
Journal name.
The journal is the Innovations in Science Teacher Education.
All right. Thank you.
The name of my journal is Journal of Global Literacies, Technologies, and Emerging Pedagogies. It's available only online, so not yet a hard copy.
Okay. And what would you say the scope of your journal is?
Okay. So it focuses on global literacies, cross-cultural network spaces and communities, digital global learning communities, trans-border, transnational network pedagogies, geopolitical dynamics of education, digital learning ecologies, and pedagogies in knowledge and information-based societies.
The journal is called the Journal of Comparative and International Higher Education. The focus of it is to examine studies, conditions, situations related to higher education in a comparative or an international context. So it's quite a broad range of topics. We have 3 issues a year, spring, fall, and winter, and we've designated the winter issue to cover 2 things. First is a special issue with a special invited editor who then coordinates a set of authors around a theme. And we have actually special editors going into the future for about 3 years. But if anybody is interested in being a special editor, special issue editor, come and talk to me. And then we also in the winter have a special graduate student issue, which showcases graduate student work in progress. Everything undergoes double blind, even the graduate student submission. So you get a good idea of what it is to be published and get feedback from those in the field about your ideas and the directions of your studies. Thank you.
Thank you. And I believe Dr. Sella, you were next.
Yes, my journal is the Journal of Interdisciplinary Studies in Education, and it's an online journal. When we started, it was both online and paper, but we ran out of funds to support the paper copy, so we now maintain an online version. It's called the Journal of Interdisciplinary Studies in Education, and it's focused on empirical studies, theoretical and empirical studies in interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary research in education.
Okay, thank you. And Dr. Sharma, I believe you were next.
So my journal is the International Journal of Multidisciplinary Perspectives in Higher Education. So the keyword is the sort of the multidisciplinary and also international there, because what we are trying to do is to invite teachers, especially, or teacher scholars who study practice and policies of education and write in ways that can be understood across transnational borders as well as disciplinary borders. Since we also provide some form of direct mentorship, so that scholars who are not used to writing in the sort of the standard IMRAD or theoretical or methodologically rigorous ways can participate in this international forum, because the ideas are there. The format is challenging for a lot of scholars, especially given that in many developing parts of the world, there's pressure to publish in international journals, and often, that either doesn't happen in feasible venues, or people are victims of predatory journals and so on. So we're targeting mostly scholars in the global south, but we also welcome scholars at global centers.
Okay. Thank you. And Dr. Rummel and Dr. Herman, your journal, please.
Yeah, so our journal is the Innovations in Science Teacher Education. The journal is under the Association for Science Teacher Education organization. It is a journal that is designed to be a place where science teacher educators, those that prepare both pre-service and in-service science teachers, can share their practitioner work, so what they do to prepare those teachers for the field. So we're not a research journal. We do want our authors to provide some evidence that what they are doing to prepare teachers is working, but we're not necessarily a research journal. So that makes us a little bit different than most of the journals that you might come across. We are an online-only journal. We have 4 issues a year, and we are in our 3rd year of publication.
Good. Thank you. And
of underrepresented and minority progress. So this is all about the progress made in the history of civilization by the people who are minority and underrepresented population. It is published twice a year. We are going to publish a 3rd issue very soon, and we are published both online and print.
I love the title.
My name is Chris Nabista. I'm also founding editor of Journal of International Students. And we have hard copies here, both digital and print. We publish 4 volumes each year, quarterly publication, and this is 10th year we are publishing. We publish 4 times, and roughly we publish about 25 to 30 articles in each issue, receive over 300 manuscripts annually. We have roughly 6,000 subscribers, and around 490 libraries across the globe are subscribing. Doesn't matter whether you are local or foreign student, once you cross the border and have a status of international student, and we want to document the stories, empirical studies on cross-cultural experience, being in different country other than your country of birth. So we look into immigration, the mobility trained of the student and scholars, and then overall college experience. And then this is a flagship journal in the Star Scholars Network. This has become recently number 19 among all higher education journals. I'm proud of the initiative that I started about 10 years ago. That's all I have. Thank you.
What is the impact factor of your journal?
Scopus in impact factor is 0.80, but the Google Scholar, the citation ranking is number 19 among all higher education journals.
Okay, and yours? And maybe all the editors can tell us the impact factor.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Our journal is available via Google Scholar,
don't have the Scopus factor yet
Mhm.
because we have to reach that 2-year milestone,
Okay,
which is soon to be reached.
okay.
But
Dr. Rabi, do you know your impact factor for your journal?
It's in progress. So we have been around for a number of years, and nobody of the previous editors have even thought about going to get the impact factor. We needed, in order to be ranked in for an impact, you need to have your DOI number, and DOI numbers are very expensive. And so we just worked out a way to get DOI numbers for all of our articles without the expense. And so now we are, as soon as that's finalized, we'll be able to start to apply to the various citation areas and start getting us more involved. So I suspect within the next 3 months, we will begin to be ranked.
What we have been doing is, in order to be listed in the major impact factors databases, some of the young journals and then some of the journals that we will establish in our field, we have been indexed, listed with ProQuest, ERIC, Scopus, EBSCOhost, and then the other local databases, Cengage, Site Factors, Social Science, list. So some of the journals are in the process of receiving those meta-analysis, metadata information from these companies, local indexing companies. So far, it's only 2 or 3 journals from out of 7 journals have received the basic initial impact factor. Those were from Site Factors indexing companies. And some journals are in the progress to get, the latest impact factor from the Scopus or Social Science Index. And majority of our journals are also from social sciences. And these are different journals from the journals that many of you are from the, art science or engineering or medical field. So impact factor is not something we feel proud of. We look into the regular publication process, peer review, quality of the work in our field, including either in the
7 journals are part of the Star Scholars Network, and I'm going to let Dr. Bista near the end describe a little bit more about what that is. But I did want to have Dr. Herman and Dr. Rummel maybe chime in here, because they're sort of in between it, science education and factor, and from your perspective, which is kind of straddling humanities, being education and the sciences, your view on impact factor.
Right, so we're the inaugural editors of this journal. So we're the flagship practitioner journal for the ASTE, the Association for Science Teacher Education. And practitioner journals typically don't have an impact factor, but we do have acceptance rates. So for people going up for promotion and tenure, a lot of times we receive emails regarding that, and our acceptance rate is roughly around 19%. And so, it's very similar to NSTA journals that are focused on practitioner work, where they pretty much describe the acceptance rate that really tells you the tier of the journal. And as well, NSTA does passer ratios, because mostly practitioner people will share the issues with other people. Ours is actually free to members. A lot of times libraries want to have access for it, but what we're really looking at is abstracting in Google Scholar, as well as in ERIC.
So it sounds like, and this is the point I wanted to make, there are other ways of measuring the journals. It's not just the impact factor, and I understand in science you got to look at that, and if you're able to publish in one that's got a high impact factor, go for it. But there are other ways to describe, the efficacy, the impact, I can't think of another word, of the journal as was described here. So
I would also add that it's not, in addition to how many articles you do not accept, but you also looking into a range of the authors. In terms of gender, in terms of nation of origin, in terms of the type of institutions that they teach in, because you want to have a wide diversity of authors in your issue that will provide various viewpoints that perhaps you won't get in other places.
Dr. Gully, I know you wanted to add something.
Yeah, definitely. I think I can piggyback on what Dr. Ravi just said. It's very, very important and deep here. It's philosophical also. The set of journals that STAR Network hosts is advancing global social mobility. So it is also to challenge some of the ossified, established standard norms, which sometimes tend to be measurable in factors such as impact factors, which we do not have at this point, but we will get there soon.
Yeah, can I add a quick thing? I mean, Dr. Rabi and Dr. Gowli have already highlighted the importance of looking at quality differently. Quality can be, I think, discussed in terms of inclusiveness, diversity, relevance, local significance, instead of just counting how many people we threw out. I think we can also look at the diversity of ideas and the scope of an impact of. There are different ways of measuring, and I think our journals are in areas where those measurements can be very messy, if possible, at all possible to develop. And I believe that we are kind of developing the impact without necessarily being able to measure in numbers. But there must be ways to sort of at least record and report and talk about the impact, other than simplistically, like how many people did you reject, or things like that, or a number based on how a machine is able to record. In many parts of the world where my authors for my journal work, there's not a lot of publication, there's not a lot of citation, and their work may not be cited by Western scholars either. So they will, if we use the traditional methods, they'll be trapped into this vicious cycle where nothing makes sense for them. So this issue of justice, this issue of equity, participation, marginalization, are all enmeshed with the process and ideas of the journals.
Thank you. Very excellent point, and something I tend to forget because everybody always talks about the impact factor, but there's so much
That's
more.
easy to talk about.
Yeah, easy. Whereas what?
But a very important factor again. Forgive me. I think it would be injustice if I didn't bring it. Somebody brought up about that issue, predatory, whatever it is. So what that means is the money-making machine. But we STAR journals have no intent of making money. It's all about serving the humanity, being the advocate of social justice and equity, research and advocacy. So that's who we are. So we are not using our platforms to make money in any way, shape, or form. So that's why it speaks volumes.
Yes.
Like a lot of predatory journals are about making money.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Well, let's move on from the topic of impact factor to the business of writing. So question number 5 here, for beginning academic scholars who might want to submit an article to your journal, what is one important tip with regard to writing? And I will first address this to Dr. Salah because we haven't heard from her recently.
Well, one important thing is to make sure that you upload your article.
Yeah.
Right, because a lot of our writers will fail to upload the article, and I have to chase them down and say kind of like, you really need to upload your article in the right place so I can access it. And also proofreading the article, because that's one of the things that usually a lot of reviewers will just quickly dismiss the article, even if it has great research or good ideas. But if it is poorly written, it gets quickly rejected. Mainly, of course, we look at for scholarly articles, so we always look for solid research methodology and well-articulated ideas and conclusions. And there's a lot of good research that gets written but fails to produce a good conclusion or a solid generalization based on the findings, the research.
Thank you. Dr. Rummel and Dr. Herman, your journal.
Yeah, so that's it. Primarily, I think our biggest issue is people not understanding the journal and maybe not reading some of the articles that are available. So, as Rummel mentioned, our journal is available online for ASTE members, but for each issue, there is one article that is freely available to everyone. So, yeah, it'd be good if authors spend some time looking through some past issues, reading some of the articles so that they understand the style of writing that we are looking for. So that's probably the biggest thing. We still get some submissions that are not good fits for the journal, people that are submitting pure research. We are Practitioner Journal. We don't publish research, so we reject those pretty quickly. Yeah, we get a few other areas that just aren't appropriate for the journal. So those are big rejections. I think in terms of writing, details. A lot of people will leave out details, and sometimes Ramo and I at the editorial level will have to decide whether we are going to send it out for external review. If it's lacking so many details that we kind of have a pretty good sense of what reviewers might say, then we don't want to waste our reviewers' time. There's only so many times that we can call on a reviewer to review journals, to manuscripts throughout a year. We try to limit that to 3 or 4 times a year for our reviewers. So we want to make sure that if we're sending something out for external review, that it's quality at that point. So yeah, oftentimes writers just lack the details necessary for someone to really understand what they're talking about. So yeah, as you heard, I think details, proofreading, asking somebody else to read it, make sure that it makes sense to them, especially if you're a sole author. I think that's critical.
Blinding manuscript.
Yeah, so we still have issues with people not properly blinding, including their name in the reference list, or providing too much information, the name of a grant project that could easily be traced back to them, things of that nature. So yeah, oftentimes we have to send things back for that. So yeah, and just in terms of writing it, it's proofreading it, making sure that if there is a checklist for authors or guidelines, that you are adhering to those guidelines. And I know sometimes people write broadly, not knowing exactly where they want to send it, but I think it's important to pick a journal that matches what you're writing and write to that journal. And if it is not accepted, to keep refining it for that journal. And then if you decide that you're going to abandon and move to another journal, try to submit to a different journal, that you go back to the starting point and look at the guidelines for that journal, not just trying to send the same thing in that you wasn't accepted at another journal. I think sometimes that happens. People move on to the second journal of choice and fail to go back and meet the guidelines for that different journal.
Yeah, good point.
Can I add something along the lines of what our colleague was saying?
Yes.
I think in terms of tips for writing, one is to really understand the journal, not only in terms of style guidelines that are often provided to the writers, but also in terms of the guidelines provided to the reviewers. I think that is not just a tip, but a trick. The trick is, if you go to the journal and look at the guidelines given for reviewers, then you would know how your journal is going to be judged, right? So you're basically hacking the system in a good way, to your own benefit. The other thing is to understand not only what the journal publishes, but what the mission is, right? For example, if it says transnational, cross-border, then think about who is going to read the material, the articles. So if you write in a way that people across borders will understand, maybe you need to provide context. Maybe you need to explain certain certain issues in a way that people who do not understand the local culture, local context, local system of education can understand. If you're writing across disciplines, then explain what this might mean in a way teachers in other disciplines will understand. So, so all of those things are actually captured in the review. So the review question one may be, does the journal fit, the article fit the journal, the mission and vision of the journal? Does it offer something new in terms of education, educational innovation? Or those questions are sort of a powerful way of matching the article to the journal, even if the article cannot be completely matched to the journal. At least some of the questions can be picked, and within a few hours, some of the issues that will come up or that will become reason for rejection can be addressed before submission.
Thank you. Excellent points. Dr. Limbo, tips and traps for writing. Journal.
Unmute, please.
Yeah, you have to unmute, Dr. Limbo.
No, he's unmuted.
Now he
Sorry. Okay. I started speaking without unmuting. Okay. That's another trick. Okay. So, especially, this is kind of like, I don't know, like, as an editor, I've been doing it since 2012. Send their manuscript, they really have to know or read author's guideline. And they, I think, yeah, and they should also know where is our journal moving, okay? How, like from the beginning, let's say from 2012 to 2018, how much my journal or our journal kind of shifted. My point is, if our contributors go and read, okay, so what is changing there? What is shifting there? What is old knowledge? What is new knowledge? And what we're looking for? If they kind of address these areas, then we definitely say yes. And we also do not want to say, like Professor Jomel and Romel said, okay, we don't want to waste our reviewers' time. That is really, really important. And this is what I think.
Right. So it's, I mean, it seems like common sense, doesn't it? To review the author guidelines, look at some previous publications that were recently put out, and make sure, that your particular article is geared or slanted to that journal. It seems like common sense, but so Dr. Rabi, do you have anything that you would like to add in regard to tips and traps for writing specifically?
I think I want to reinforce that while everyone has learned either your APA or your MLA and your Chicago style or whatever, but as you also know, each one of those have a lot of variations, and that's okay. So you might say, but I learned APA, and then you go to the journal and it's like, we're APA too, and you're going, that's not the APA I learned. Forget what you learned. Do what they tell you to do. If they tell you to stand on your head and take a picture of it. It doesn't really matter what you have learned. It's how are you going to apply that in the future. The other thing that I find that's very important is to make sure that you think through your submissions. The biggest area where I end up sending submissions back to the authors, either in a rejection form or as asking them to rewrite before it's formally submitted, is a weak discussion. The articles we receive seem to have really nice introductions. They have decent literature reviews. They have decent to weak methodologies. And then they have a good discussion on findings. And then it totally falls apart when it's the discussion. The so what factor. Why are you writing this? What does this mean? Why is it going to contribute to anything? That isn't there. And that takes you to an area of critical thinking. And so I would say, think through that section before you submit, because those are the areas that students usually, and scholars, not just students, but all scholars tend to have their most important problems. Thank you.
Usually, but sometimes, I have to remind, okay, can you rewrite it before I send it to my reviewers? Because like I know that, like I wasted my time and I do not want I want my reviewers to read, okay. I also usually do that. That means, okay, what I feel sometimes is the original manuscript was not written for my journal, okay. That was written for,
Yes, yes.
Yes, that I actually strongly believe that unless you are overwhelmed with submissions, in which case you will need to find a system by which you can streamline returning, rejecting, redirecting. There are many options. And to see the world in black and white as, oh, I'm going to either accept or reject is just simplistic and outdated. If you think about transnational network of scholars like ours, it is, well, luckily, we're not overwhelmed with hundreds and thousands of submissions. The Journal of International Students, one of the 7 journals, is actually overwhelmed with submissions, right? But then that's why we are finding new connections to which these, some of the articles that are sent to the JIS can be redirected. If there is no quality at all, then yes, we tell the authors, here's how you could improve this article and resend it somewhere. A lot of journals do that traditionally. A lot of journals don't. And we belong to the category that does, which says, okay, here is the potential of your journal, because it's going to be reviewed anyway. We simply guide our reviewers to say something productive. It may be 1 sentence, it may be 50 sentences, it may be extensive inline, suggestions. But the idea is that we respect writers. We don't see them in terms of like, is this person useful to advance my mission, or is this person not useful? We are not selfish, in other words. It may sound radical. It is radical in a good way.
Another thing that I would like to add is that don't, as was said before, don't be upset if you get a rejection, but pay really good attention to what is said. Now, if the rejection doesn't give you any information, file that away, and you might not ever want to publish in that journal, because it should all be a learning process. But most of the journals will be very detailed in what you were missing. And then you can look at it and say, well, I thought I put that in, and now they're telling me I didn't. Well, that means then that you didn't do it clear enough. And so you need to think through, how are you going to write? How are you going to change your focus?
Good point. Right.
Yes.
All right, we've talked a lot about reviewers. Maybe we can go on along those lines. How many peer reviewers do you usually assign per manuscript? And do the peer reviewers have a standard evaluation form, or is it a narrative that they write on their own? So it's more open-ended. And just how do you find your peer reviewers? So there's several questions there for you. And how about if we go to Dr. Salah to start us off? Forgive me if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, Dr. Salah.
Salah. Thank you. I do send each article after I look at it initially, and if I decide that it is suitable to send for reviewers, I usually send it to 3 reviewers. I do make a decision based on 2 reviewers. If many times I don't get all 3 reviews back, so if I get 2, I go ahead and look at the reviews and make a decision and forward the reviews to the authors.
Is it a
what else did you ask me?
Yeah, sorry, I asked a whole bunch of questions all at once. Is it a standard chapter?
Yes, we do have standard form where it there is several criteria that we have where the reviewer has to take into consideration, such as the methodology, the theoretical underpinning of the research, how the generalization or the discussion part, how solid it is. So there is also at the end there is an open-ended space for the reviewer to put his or her own comments, and many of the reviewers take advantage of this. Others also like to go through the document itself and provide feedback and track their feedback throughout the document. So we have that form, but we leave it up to the reviewers based on their style. But when they go and submit their reviews, they have to also choose one of 4 choices to like reject or accept with revision, or accept without revision, and so forth.
Thank you. Dr. Marana and Dr. Herman.
I think it's the exact same thing. There's a rubric online for the journal. There's also that free space in the bottom as well. We typically assign 2 reviewers per manuscript, and we try to get back to the authors within, would you say, 90 days, 60 days?
4 or 5 weeks.
Within 4 to 5 weeks. Sometimes, occasionally, we're waiting for a reviewer, and that's when if a second reviewer doesn't complete the work, another reviewer will be asked to do that. Occasionally, we've had to remove reviewers. If they don't do their job, we'll have a board meeting. Or at the board, we can make recommendations, and it'll be reviewed whether we remove reviewers that don't do their completed work. And I'm looking at your other questions. How many reviewers? Standard evaluation. Yeah, and they typically, and we also have the levels.
Well, yeah, I just want to go back. So a good reviewer is one that is timely. So I try to give them, we have some automated messages that we can send out, but I send a personal email about a week before the 4-week period. So about 3 weeks into the review, I send a personal note just asking the reviewer if they're going to be able to complete the review in the next week or so, and then I try to stick with them with personal reminders through that point. But my best reviewers are the ones that I don't have to do that for, that send in some reviews on time. Just like everybody's writing, we get a range of reviewers. We get some reviewers that might write a page and a half, where others might write a paragraph. And you kind of get to know your reviewers, and so I try to equalize those a little bit when I send out for review. We try to match up content areas and specializations as well. But I know some of my reviewers are a little more demanding, I guess is the word, than others. So I try to match those up. I know that they're, if I was to do some statistics, I know my ones that are most likely to reject, and mine that are most likely to sort of provide more feedback and sort of coach authors to publication ultimately. And that's really what we want, is ultimately to refine the writing and get people to publication. So I try to match those up as we send them out as well. So I think reviewers that are understanding of that process is, important as well.
Thank you.
You want to talk about where you get reviewers?
We do a call for reviewers annually, typically right after the big conference. So we usually do if you want to be a reviewer for the journal, you meet the editors. So
at the conference.
At the conference. So we host a workshop at the conference, and then we do a call for reviewers, and we get a pretty good amount of applications. We generally accept roughly about 20 new reviewers a year for a 3-year term. So we roughly have around 60 to 66 reviewers currently. And they'll rotate out and we'll also encourage really good viewers to possibly do another term or second term, or stay on as kind of someone who moonlights. If we don't have a specific, if someone has a very specialized area, and we don't have that depth within the editorial review board, we'll ask them individually if they would consider reviewing that manuscript as well, just to make sure it's a good fit for their viewers as well. They know what they're looking for or looking at.
Right. Dr. Would you like to say something about reviewers?
Sure. I'd like to echo, the suggestion that some of the practice that our colleagues have been doing. That's something we do among all Star Scholars journals. We have a standard format review template for each reviewers. To talk more precisely about the Journal of International Students, I do have a large number of reviewers, about roughly 200 reviewers, all published authors. And we have a board meeting have decided to have 1% of unpublished authors to serve on the board so that they will have some sort of practice and then train them. And also we run at least 2 to 3 annual virtual meetings to provide a training to have their input of the reviewers. The board meeting is with the reviewers with the editors, or board meeting with the reviewers, editors, and the advisory board members. So those board meeting decides, and if my colleague said, I would also, reviewers receive 3 years position to review, and also evaluate those reviewers automatically using our management platform system to look into how quality feedback they are providing. We always value the constructive feedback, so the author take advantage of reviewers and polish their manuscript published. Usually, if somebody publishes new article in the field, or if we happen to see them in a conference or a good match, then we invite officially to join the review team. And also we have roughly 15 editors, associate editors, and each editor do have a set of reviewers, and they individually work. And also, as Dr. Gowley mentioned earlier, instead of rejecting too many articles, actually the rejection takes place even within 2 minutes. We redirect, rechannel these authors to the other journals or the possible reviewers, so that they collaborate, they partner, they work together. The teamwork is very important, and that's how we grew up about 10 years ago when we started the journal. And still we value the collaboration, teamwork. And now having 7 journals in our network, it has been working very well. That's majority of the authors have a team work with each others. Earlier you asked about one of the tips for the authors that I always recommend them to run by their colleagues, professors, or whoever before they turn in to any journals, no matter whether emerging journal or well-established. That may be something else to consider.
Yeah, very important. Dr. Limbaugh, I think we haven't heard from you in a little while. Would you like to make any comments about your reviewers and the review form?
Okay, so we usually send the manuscript to 3 reviewers, and if I get international scholars submission, I also ask our senior PhD students, that means AVDs, to review. That way they kind of become familiar with how scholars in like cross-cultural or transnational context write, and that kind of works really well. In terms of peer review guidelines, we have standard peer review guidelines here. It looks like this. And in relation to call for reviewers, I haven't done it yet, but the interested reviewers email me. And sometimes I also email them. And since we are very big program, if we do not get reviews soon, I usually ask our colleagues, professors, okay, to review, and they do it right away, okay. So that's how we do it.
Okay, I'm feeling guilty because I always procrastinate, and then I always get it in on time, but I'm feeling guilty.
Yeah, I would try, echo what everybody else has been saying. It looks like we have very similar approaches.
Yes.
Open-ended at the end, but trying to encourage, one of the things that I've been thinking about lately is I look at all of the journals that I review articles for, and I look at those journals which seem to respect the author more than others. Just because we have to reject doesn't mean that we have to disrespect those whose work we may have to reject. Just because there needs to be a system of measurement doesn't mean that that system of measurements dehumanizes and demeans anybody or anybody's work or ideas. And I am inspired by the language sentences written in the call for reviews or reviews of other people's. One of the journals that I'm thinking about in my field is called Composition Studies. The editor basically writes to the reviewer saying, please imagine this is your colleague while being very rigorous. What they're trying to say is, imagine that you're talking to a real person. That person matters to you, but be rigorous. Here is the standard, okay? They set a very high standard, but in terms of how to communicate that idea, that standard, they say, imagine that this is your colleague who has genuine ideas instead of like, you don't understand what you're writing about, right? You lack this here, don't know. So that is how a lot of journal reviews come through. And I think it's important to communicate through the reviewers that what Uttam earlier was calling humanizing scholarship. Because especially in cross-cultural contexts, it's very easy to not understand. It's easy to understand, assume, oh, they don't have resources, or, oh, they don't know how to do this, or they are not, us versus them and whatever. So that is what we've been struggling. But there is a very standard review process and very standard rubric and very rigorous demand for maintaining quality. Right. It's not either or, it's both can be done.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's excellent advice for, if we have any doctoral students here, is somehow, not to take that rejection personally, that it's all part of the process. I like how you said, we don't reject, we just redirect. That was really beautifully said. And I wish all journal editors would do that, because we hear on the opposite end how devastated people can get by journal editors that don't think that way. So that was really wonderful to hear. Well, I would like to actually open it up to our audience, and if anybody would like to ask a question, now is the time.
I have a unique program here at Morgan where we take undergraduate students and usher them to a launching pad to a clinical doctorate degree in physical therapy. From the journals that are represented here, would any one of the journals be fitting for a descriptive type of an article that describes how we create the stepping stones from the classroom to being a clinical practitioner at an HBCU and working with international students?
I would say that in the JCIHE journal, since this is a topic of higher education, it would fit. What you would need to do, however, is bring in the comparative and or international component. So if you're focusing on the international students in the program, that could be the international component. If you find another similar program somewhere else in the world, that could be a comparative focus as well. If you're talking about internationalizing the program in terms of how you teach, what you teach, where you teach, that can also be part of it. So you got part of the requirements, but not all, but I could see that it could easily be brought in.
Okay, thank you.
We start to live up our impact factor as we are getting in the process, so that it will encourage more and more of our colleagues to publish these journals.
Yes. Yeah, they did kind of discuss the whole idea of impact factor. Not all of them have it. Does anybody want to again address it?
Dr. Aldi, definitely, listen, these are very real issues. Like, we want tenure promotion that are academic, that are news, there are policies which just cannot always challenge, right? We have to abide by the rules. So the rules, again, we say philosophically we're challenging. But if you are looking for impact factor, go with the journal that it has the impact factor. If you're looking for impact, publish in the STAR journals, because impact is here. But impact factor measurement by that mechanism is yet to be to manifest in our journals, which will soon have, because we are meeting those milestones the way, I mean, it has to be measured in their terms, whoever started that impact factor, right? And there is not one, there are multiple. So there are multiple ways to look at it. Like if you want a lot of citations of your research, if you publish in this young journal, I think it is one of the fastest growing journals in the world because it's open access. Your high impact factor journal, it could get published, but nobody may, I mean, very few people may have access to it. So it may have a chance of being cited, you know, lower chances of being cited than getting published here. So if you want your articles to be read by more people, because it is open access, I mean, there are choices you have to make. So I think you need to use your discretion and know what it is.
There are certain mechanisms to understand, to measure the impact factor by numerical, the data points, like how many, times it was cited, who read, where it was republished or recited. Those are there. And there are several new emerging databases who are challenging, social science impact factor established by traditional, Western publishers.
Right. A lot of people who talk about impact factor are talking about this focus impact factor, and that is being challenged. Like you might have heard, a lot of universities are not requiring GRE to get to the graduate school.
Yeah.
So that used to be a big reality. It's no longer is a reality.
Yeah.
Right? So if you are trying to get into a school that requires GRE, you need a GRE, right? To know what you need, what you're doing. But there are philosophies behind it.
So thank you for a really good panel. As a grad student, I'm soaking this up as best I can. So thank you all. So my question, I have two questions. One, I was fortunate to get published. Thank you, Dr. Ghali.
Congratulations.
In JUMP. And so my question now is—
I was returned multiple times.
Yeah.
You didn't give up.
No, sir. No, sir. So my question, though, is now how to boost an article's reach in the academy if we are interested in engaging in a larger discussion. So is there something that could be done? I know I use Twitter a lot. Can we engage other colleagues who are in that particular discipline to try and get some traction? And then my second question is, I think this is such an important factor. So I'm interested in joining the academy at some point, and I don't really believe that Morgan stressed grad students getting publications. Some of my colleagues in other universities, they have 4 or 5 publications even before they finish their program. It really wasn't stressed, at least in my experience. And so I don't know what we can do here at Morgan to try and improve that, because I think this scholarship is really important.
Great question.
Can I quickly respond to that question about making sure that your journal articles are read, that you are connected to the discipline, that you feed back into the discourse. As graduate students, I think it's important both to write in such a way that your voice, your ideas, your interests, your passion are heard. So it's not only about what you do after your journal article has been published. It's also how you choose, you select your topic, how you frame your discussion, how you engage existing scholarship. All of those design factors will lead to interest or lack of interest down the road. Of course, you have to pitch it, right? But if the product did not, articulate that passion, it did not take a strong position and only try to just get published, then it may be difficult for you to get some traction there. So I guess I think there are a lot of graduates in the audience today I just became really conscious of how challenging it is for graduate students to publish. But I think that this group of editors are really the best, are running the best types of journals that are really open to and generous about grad students, about inclusiveness, about mentoring along the way, right? About taking a generous approach. So I think you should target those journals where you can sense that there is a sense of community support rather than just impact factor in a numerical way. Like whenever there is high impact factor in a numerical way, be careful. There may also be a very tough competition, and if you land in a place that is impossible for graduate students, you'll end up losing. So I'm not saying that necessarily that impact numerically measured journals tend to reject more, but they might, because if the number itself depends on rejecting, it's likely that you will be rejected too. So I guess I would start with quality rather than quantity. I'd start by looking for journals that seem to be inclusive, new, and yet you'll get there. Like Uttam was saying, you don't have to achieve everything at once. You have to achieve one thing or two things, and then you can go from there. When I was in graduate school, they told me, oh, don't publish before you're actually ready. And I actually followed that advice. It was very, very, very bad advice, okay? Don't put out something that will just stick to, that'll be sort of put you write yourself into a corner, said one of my professors. The idea was I was trying to write about another country, another context, and they said, don't do this. You have to belong to the mainstream before you can even speak. And that assimilation idea, that's too simplistic. It's true, but so incomplete. It is true, but so unjust. And so I would say try to go for one or two things, not everything. If you try to go for a 14 impact factor, you might not get there too. It's just maybe too much torture.
Yeah. So what about a practitioner journal? Certainly I'm most familiar with our doctoral program in science education, and the students that come for master's and doctoral degrees are already practicing science teachers. So is your journal good for doctoral students, Ron and Rummel?
So I had a little difficulty hearing. I think you were asking if the journal is appropriate for graduate students?
Yes.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah, we don't, it's not really something that we look at from authors coming in. We do on the other end in terms of reviewers. If we have reviewers that are doctoral students, we try to, as Rummel said earlier, we have 2 reviewers that we assign to each article. We'll often put a new reviewer or a doc student as a 3rd reviewer and help them see what the other reviews look like so that they can get some feedback. Okay, where does mine kind of fit in with the other 2 that I'm looking at? But from an author standpoint, there's nothing that would differentiate a doc student from anyone else. So yeah, it would just be treated as they are.
And actually, you know what? A lot of times I work with the published authors on the tail end also, and some of them were doctoral students when they submitted. It was accepted, and by the time it comes around to publication, they'll say, "Can you update my new? I guess I got a new job at this place," or they would ask their affiliation, whether it would be changed or whatnot. So that's a question that typically comes up too. So definitely, doctoral students have published as well.
Yeah, and just to get back to an earlier comment, so both Ram and I are graduates of Morgan State University, so we can chime in a little bit about the program. So, yeah, I mean, when we're interviewing for faculty now, I'm a little sometimes apprehensive of the opposite. Someone that has published a lot with a professor. Because I don't know if they can do the work alone. If that professor, thinking about it from a professor standpoint, you can't maintain that number of relationships with every student that graduates, right? And so there's a point at which their contribution is going to diminish, and you're going to have to take more lead author role. So, publishing fewer but taking the lead author role or the sole author, I think, is more important than the quantity. So yeah, I don't know that was stressed very much, but from when I was a grad student, I was sort of trying to carve my own niche. I wasn't necessarily doing what other professors were doing there at Morgan, and that was kind of a blessing in disguise. While it was more difficult for me to go down that path, I was the lead author, and and in some cases the sole author. So I thought that brought me a little bit more attention in the field. So I think you can use it to your advantage. I think as a doc student, you also have the benefit of time. There is no one. Well, I don't know. Maybe you do get a little pressure to publish, but your job doesn't depend on it, right? And so you can take the time to make sure that what you're writing is going to be well received and going to be something that people are citing and talking about. And so, as you're going to conferences and following up, making sure that you self-cite and that it is such a contribution to the field that other people are citing it. And then over time, that will start to pay dividends on the back end where people are citing you, and then you're self-citing, and it starts to, at some point it starts to snowball. So I wouldn't worry too much about how much you're publishing at this point. I think it's important that you're doing the right thing, that you're trying to get published, that you're working on manuscripts, that you're submitting them, and that you become comfortable with that process, and that if something does not get flat out accepted, that you continue to work at it to bring it to publication. I think that's really all that we can do. So I'd say keep doing that.
Suggestions for edits, and then we get it back. It could be a year later. It could be 2 years later. And it just means that the comments we made resonated as important, and that they spent the time to take something that was possibly really good and made it into something amazing. So I see that as a very positive. For everyone here, we do accept articles on a rotating basis, and students, we are always looking for people to be part of the blind review process. We are doing our graduate issue like this day, so you kind of missed it for 2018, but think about submitting for 2019. We accept articles as early as September 1st. Thank you.
I would say the same, and I got to leave also.
Yes, can continue the conversation, but thank you to all of you that joined us virtually. Thank you very, very much. We've learned a lot. I learned a lot. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. We take inspiration from you all the time. If you care me well.